The book doesn't really have time to go into everything step by step, so once James is convinced of the Animorphs' story, a lot of this stuff gets summarized. James lays out his conditions. He chooses his team, and they give morphing powers to Pedro, who's paralyzed, but Pedro doesn't become part of the team. Jake agrees, and they bring in James's first selections, which includes Kelly, a girl with cystic fibrosis, Colette, a paraplegic girl who claims to have injured herself in a skiing accident, but we later learn was born with the condition, and... Oh, really? They went there? Are you fucking kidding me? The fourth member of the auxiliary Animorphs is a young man suffering from cerebral palsy, bound to an electric wheelchair, unable to communicate clearly, and his name is, I shit you not, Timmy. Timmy from South Park is a character in this book. Well, he's not screaming out his name all the time, but did anyone involved with this book think this was a good idea? Okay, I know what you're saying. Maybe this was all just a big coincidence, right? Well, first off, it's clear that the powers to be knew about South Park. They referenced it back in number 22, The Solution, and it totally seems like something Michael Grant would watch, but maybe they stopped watching it at some point. Timmy first showed up only a year before this book was published. He's a popular character, but still pretty new. It could still be a coincidence. His original name was Twan. According to behind-the-scenes information, this character was originally called Twan. And in fact, due to an editorial oversight, he's called Twan 2 books from now. I know, let's rename him after that South Park character. Okay, maybe I'm being unfair. I don't know why, and I don't know how, but goddamn if it isn't distracting. Anyway, the 4 auxiliaries are giving morphing powers and a pigeon morph, and that night all 7 of them fly around. It's pretty exhilarating stuff. For both the Animorphs and we the readers, morphing has become this normal thing, so it's nice to be reminded just how fucking amazing it actually is. And think how exhilarating it must be for the kids, who have had mobility issues for most of their lives, to not only be able to move unhindered, but to be able to fly. Not to mention thought speak, which Timmy finds delightful. Rubber baby buggy bumpers, rubber baby buggy bumpers, rubber baby buggy bumpers, he chanted. This is fantastically fabulous, fortuitously felicious. Timmy laughed at his own alliterative excesses. You want to know what hell on earth is? He asked. What? Having a large vocabulary, an encyclopedic knowledge of musical theater, and a speech impediment. Unfortunately, the morphing only heals James, though this allows him to make standing for the first time a very dramatic gesture. After this, the story really goes into fast forward. The first batch of auxiliary Animorphs get some battle morphs, and every night for the next week, the Animorphs return to the rehab center to meet up with James and recruit more members, eventually totaling 17 auxiliaries, 23 Animorphs in total. That's surreal. It's like breaking a rule or something. It had just been accepted after the David trilogy that nobody could be trusted to join the Animorphs. But things have gotten so bad that the old rulebook is just chucked into the trash. The narrative has collapsed to the point where the term Animorphs is no longer about specific characters. Animorphs is now an adjective, a state of being. Let's get going down that rabbit hole. What's interesting about the introduction of the auxiliary Animorphs is that it would work on its own as a starting point for its own series. We've seen it before. An older superhero shows up out of nowhere and enlists the nearest person to the cause and gifts them the same powers they have. That's more or less the story of Hal Jordan becoming the Green Lantern. Imagine if the series had been the extended adventures of Elfangor, and then, 58 books in, he finally crashes on Earth and gives the Animorphs their powers. That's what this is. It's like Animorphs is shedding its skin. The initial team of auxiliaries even kind of mirror the Animorphs. James is basically the new and improved Jake. Even when comparing James to Jake in his prime, James exudes a higher level of confidence and control over the situation. He's shown to have leadership skills before recruited. Even the hospital staff respects his authority. And let's not look past the symbolism of James physically dominating Jake despite his handicap. Colette has shades of Rachel in her. She has an adventurous spirit despite her disability, and she really hits it off with Marco in a way that makes you go, man, I'd ship that. We later see her battle morph as a crocodile, a morph that not even Rachel could handle. Timmy is as loud and boisterous as Marco, at least in morph. Kelly, well, there's not much to Kelly, so you're the Cassie stand-in. Oh, and for reasons I'll get into later, Pedro is our Tobias in this equation. It's like the universe is auto-correcting itself. The original Animorphs are no longer filling their original roles, so new ones have to be brought in to replace them. Wow, if Applegate had wanted to, she could have killed off some or all of the original Animorphs and continued the series with these characters. I'm not saying that would have been a good idea, but the setup is there for that. The narrative collapse is so devastating that you don't really need the Animorphs in your Animorphs series anymore. With the rehab center tapped out, the Animorphs start looking for a new place, settling on a school for the blind. Cassie's dad winds up overhearing them talk about this, and before the Animorphs leave, he confronts his daughter. "Dad," I said, "I don't have time to argue ethics with you. I don't have time to convince you that sometimes you have to do something uncomfortable to make things right in the end. This is war. Every minute counts. We're fighting to save the human race." "The human race?" my father repeated. "Okay, answer me this, Cassie. Is what you're doing with these disabled children humane?" My father sounded like me. Like the old me. But I wasn't that naive person anymore. I had no answer. I turned and walked away, starting to morph Osprey. "Cassie," he cried. "Cassie, wait!" But I didn't wait. I finished the morph and flew. Because you see, Cassie is finally showing personal growth and maturing in the face of a bleak future. So all the Animorphs start taking the trip this time, showing that they're getting more confident in this operation. Cassie's feeling a little less confident, however. She's having second thoughts on that confrontation with Dad, and even at one point decides to go back, but Jake orders her to stay with the mission. God knows why they need all 6. Shouldn't somebody be in charge of the camp? And why not bring along an auxiliary or 2 who might know how to connect with these kids? But of course, Jake isn't thinking clearly. He's so distracted that when they get to the place, they realize they're not sure how to approach this, since a lot of their pitch relies heavily on visual demonstration. Well, they'll wing it, I guess. They find a young red-headed girl and start giving her the pitch. Cassie, morphed as Fly, manages to spot a camera just before 10 armed blue band Hork-Bajir burst into the room. The Yeerks were waiting for them. This was a trap. Tom is there, marking their first direct confrontation with him since their identities were discovered. When we were in the hallway, Tom closed the door behind us. Then he turned and struck Jake savagely across the face. "My host's own brother?" Jake reeled and a Hork-Bajir caught him, propped him up. Tom struck him again. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? All that time we were searching for you, looking for Andalites, and it was you! Right there in my own house, right down the hall! I could have killed you 1,000,000 times! One almost starved me to death for my stupidity!" I know what he means here, but my mind goes to Tom in a cage and One outside taunting him with a piece of cake. "Boy, this sure is filling. I couldn't eat another bite. Guess I'll just throw it away then." So while the rest of the Animorphs are escorted to the building's garage, Cassie makes a run for it. There's no way she can save the team by herself. Thankfully, they have spares now. She goes to the rehab center and wakes up James, who rounds up the rest of the auxiliaries with a near-military proficiency. James is the real deal, guys. Some of the auxiliaries get overexcited and morph the wrong things, but eventually they get everyone into flying morphs, heading towards the school. A whopping 18 Animorphs flying into action. Quite the sight. Even more so when they land and go into battle morph, though Cassie begins to think this was all just a big mistake. Why hadn't I listened to my dad? How could we have done something so irresponsible, so stupid, so cruel? We, the Animorphs, were as bad as the Yeerks. We were worse than the Yeerks. I grasped James' arm. It's okay. We can handle it without you. Morph to bird and get everyone out of here. Fly away as fast as you can. No, Cassie. James looked down at me, gently squeezed the hand that held his arm. They won't make it, James. They can't. James smiled and stepped away. Watch us. To the others, battle morphs, now. Kelly, streaks of dark black puddled across her face. Her nose flattened, turned large and pink. 2 horns sprouted from her head. Within seconds, she was a charging, snorting bull. Colette, her arms shortened, legs retracted and bent, snout stretched, black-green skin appeared along the bridge of her nose, coursed down the length of her body. She was a crocodile. Timmy's shoulders hunched, rounded out. His forehead shrank, chin retracted. Body turned sleek and muscled. Short, tanned fur sprouted from nose to tail. Sharp teeth erupted from the bottom and top gums. He was a bobcat. All around me, warriors. A gorilla, after Marco's favorite morph. Another elephant. In spite of Rachel's jealousy, a grizzly, chosen by a boy named Julio. Rattlesnake, rhino, wolf, panther, golden eagle. James' choice of battle morph was an ironic one. Though when he'd chosen a male lion, he had no idea David, the ill-fated Animorph, had chosen the same. Jake is not superstitious. Ignoring our meaningful looks, he said nothing except, "Good choice, James." Now watching the lion's wild golden mane emerge from James's own thick golden hair, the morph seemed somehow appropriate. I can't be the only one who's got the Justice League Unlimited theme playing through his head right now, right? So the auxiliaries charge in. What they lack in tactical experience, they make up for with surprise in numbers. It's truly chaotic, like someone empties Noah's Ark into Reservoir Dogs. Eventually, Animorphs Kanto League escape and join the fight with Animorphs Johto League, and then Visor 1 and a fresh batch of goons show up, and we got ourselves a slobber knocker. Blood is shed. Cassie has to coach Kelly into demorphing to save herself from a fatal injury. Visor 1 morphs a tentacled beastie and tries to choke out Jake, but one of his own goons slices the tentacle off. Hey, some members of the Yeerk peace movement are hiding among the Yeerk troops. This just keeps getting better. In the chaos, Tom gets his hand on the morphing cube and makes a run for it. Jake follows Tom to the woods while Cassie follows Jake. Jake hasn't been thinking clearly this entire book, but this is easy. He knows what he has to do. He can't let the Yeerks have the morphing cube, no matter what. And that means killing Tom. Cassie knows this too, and knows that if Jake does this, there's no going back for him. Tom was the thing Jake was fighting for, the reason he stuck it out as the appointed leader this whole time. Killing Tom would send Jake into a darkness he might never escape from. But Tom getting away with the morphing cube would be a fatal blow to the team. It would allow the Yeerks unchecked morphing capabilities and all the advantages that go with it, like healing and thought speak. It would mean the Animorphs couldn't recruit any more auxiliaries. And even more than that, to give the Yeerks the morphing cube would fully complete the narrative collapse. The morphing cube is Animorphs' first symbol, its first icon, and what a wonderful icon it is. Externally simple, a perfect cube, bright blue, almost a children's toy. But on the inside, infinitely complex, much like the Animorphs themselves, much like Animorphs itself. The metaphor of the Yeerks is that of a corrupting influence, a hidden cancer that eats away at what you thought was safe and sacred. You think giving the morphing powers to allies devalues our heroes? Imagine giving those powers to the enemy. It is possible to stop a narrative collapse, but it requires a sacrifice. And Tom is that sacrifice. If Cassie allows Jake to do this, Animorphs can still live, can still struggle, can still fight. If Cassie allows Jake to do this, Animorphs can go on forever. I reached the clearing where they both stood. Tom was out of breath, staggering. Jake was only a yard or two behind him. Tom turned, lifted his arm, aimed his weapon. "I'll kill you, Jake," he said, voice raged. "I will." Jake snarled, crouched, prepared to spring. That's when I shot forward and closed my jaws over Jake's uninjured back leg, clamped down. Jake roared, turned on me, smacked at my head with his paw. The blow sent me sprawling. Claws raked deep gashes in my side. But it was worth it. The pain, everything. I'd done what I had to do. I'd made the sacrifice. Tom disappeared into the night. Jake and I lay there, panting with pain and fatigue. We had nothing to show for this fight, except that we were alive to fight another day. And tomorrow, Jake could face himself in the mirror. You know, putting aside all the dumb things the character has done, the stupid things she said, to the lives she's put in jeopardy before now, it seems fitting that Cassie would be the one to kill Animorphs. The series is killed with kindness, and everything that follows is a direct result of that kindness. Every death after this point is blood on Cassie's hands. But Cassie is Cassie, and Cassie decided to never second guess herself again. In the final product, at least, because while that would be a very poetic place to end this review, there's an interesting element here. This is the only Animorphs book for which we have substantial deleted scenes for. Yes, years ago, someone involved in the series production leaked a few things that were cut from final publication. Most of it's clarification. For example, what happened to that blind girl the Animorphs tried to recruit? Here's what the finished book says. The blind, red-headed girl who had been observed on infrared camera talking to Jake and Rachel had escaped. Before the Yeerks could come back for her, she'd simply walked out of the facility in Rachel morph. And that's it. From that, the implication is that the girl disappeared completely. The early draft goes into a lot more detail about this character. The blind, red-headed girl who had been observed on infrared camera talking to Jake and Rachel had escaped. Before the Yeerks could come back for her, she simply walked out of the facility in Rachel morph. Jake had sent Tobias to look for her. He'd spotted her from the air and brought down a sparrow, live, for her to acquire. Then he led her back to the camp. They were waiting for us when we returned. Her name was Elena. She'd stayed with Marco's parents. Elena's sight had not been restored, and she was in some pretty major shock. But she'd shown a lot of guts and a lot of resourcefulness. Her parents lived out of town and only visited on weekends. How the school would explain her absence, we didn't know. It was something we'd have to worry about later. It's neat, but Applegate probably couldn't think of anything to do with the characters, so she got cut. We've already got 17 other auxiliaries, and we'll learn next to nothing about 13 of them. Then there's the book's final moment. Back at camp, Jake rages against Cassie, demanding to know why she did this, why she let Tom get away with the morphing cube. She tries to spin some bullshit about how Tom was armed and she was trying to protect Jake, but there's no answer that can fix this. Here's how the finished book ends. You were wounded. He might have killed you. Then why didn't you go after him? Jake demanded. You weren't hurt. With the trees for cover and the wolf's speed, you could have taken him down. I couldn't explain, because I didn't understand it myself. All I knew was that letting Tom take the morphing cube had seemed absolutely the right thing to do. And something told me I was right. The early draft goes on quite a bit longer, and the implications are completely different. I couldn't explain, because I didn't understand it myself. All I knew was that at the time it had seemed so clear. Letting Tom take the morphing cube had seemed absolutely the right thing to do. But now, I didn't know why. I couldn't explain what I'd done because it wouldn't make logical sense. So I lied. I was afraid, Jake. I was scared he'd shoot me. Jake looked at me with disgust, like he knew I was lying, but couldn't figure out why. I felt depressed and heartsick. I'd made a decision. And the decision I'd made had changed the dynamics of the war forever. Decision? I'd acted on an impulse, a stupid, emotional, naive, and sentimental impulse. I'd wanted to protect Jake, and the result was that I'd put millions of people's lives in jeopardy, and made Jake hate and distrust me. Jake walked away from me. It seemed like I was seeing a lot of Jake's back lately. I heard the rustle of feathers, and Tobias landed on a nearby branch. Relationships are hard, he said quietly. I don't know how humans bear it. It took a moment before the significance of his words sank in. Tobias no longer considered himself human. That's when I knew for certain that Tobias had deliberately trapped himself in morph. The life of a human had been so painful for Tobias, so he decided to leave it behind. Why? What was wrong with us? As a race, as a species? Why, with all our gifts and our resources and our intellect, why couldn't we figure out how to make life wonderful for each other? Why were there rehab centers and clinics and hospitals full of ignored and neglected kids and adults? People who were just as brave and strong and willing to contribute as anybody else. Why did people spend so much time trying to hurt each other and so little time trying to help each other? Why did people spend so much time trying to take things away from each other instead of giving? If the Yeerks won, would life on this planet really be that different? Jake interrupted us. His voice was cold, his tone icy. Tobias, I need you. There's something we have to do. Just you and me, nobody else. Jake and Tobias left the camp. Jake is Falcon, Tobias is Hawk. I followed them anyway. I followed Jake and Tobias through the dark night. They went to the rehab center as I knew they would, slipped through James's open window. About a half hour later, they flew back out and winged toward the camp. I sat in a tree, watching the rehab center, waiting, hoping. 20 minutes later, 2 red-tailed hawks came flying out the window, their wings beating the air, one leading the other. Jake had not forgotten his promise. Silhouetted against the moon, James and Pedro stretched out their wings and soared up, 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 and disappeared into the clouds. James would see to it that they were back in their beds before they were missed. He was a leader. He was responsible. He was focused. But he was still human, and he was still humane. Like Jake, and like me. First off, I get cutting the bit about Cassie realizing Tobias intentionally trapped himself in Morph. While that remains my personal theory, I think it's better if it's not spelled out so directly. I do wish they kept the bit about hospitals full of ignored kids. Gives that part of the book a bit of a thesis statement that Cassie's the best character to deliver. This is also what I meant about Pedro being the Tobias stand-in. Pedro also finds life unbearable and is symbolically given the red-tailed hawk morph. And then there's Cassie. Early draft Cassie and finished book Cassie are 2 completely different animals. Early draft Cassie questions her actions to the end, unsure if she's made the right choice, while finished draft Cassie stares into the abyss she's created and still thinks she was right. This change was a conscious choice by the creators to have Cassie believe in her bad decision. I don't know when it happened, but Kay Applegate eventually decided that Cassie is a moron. Post-book follow-up. I'm not sure why, but this book seems to get undervalued as the cornerstone game changer it is. Maybe because it's Cassie, maybe because her final act in this book leaves a bad taste in your mouth, as it should. It's certainly not a happy book, but it is an amazing book, one in which every remaining rule of the series is broken. Not even Jake and Cassie's relationship survives this. They're pretty much broken up from this point on. And considering how Tobias and Rachel's relationship will wind up later, the tagline for the final arc might as well be, love is a lie and romance is dead. I would argue that Cassie gets the best final solo book out of all the Animorphs, but in a very interesting and deceptive way. She doesn't get her reward like Tobias, she doesn't tie up loose ends like Rachel. Instead, she's shown to be a self-destructive element. In this stage of the conflict, there is no place for moralizing, for debating the ethics, for putting things in the neat little boxes of right and wrong, and to stick to those guns with do nothing but prolong the pain. Cassie's the kind of person who rips the Band-Aid off slowly, painfully, instead of in one quick yank, and this will prove to be the Animorphs' ruined. Granted, a hefty chunk of this book's weight stems from what happens afterwards, when we see the aftermath of Cassie's decisions. Maybe that's partially why some people didn't care for it. It's a grower, and one I love. Sadly, it doesn't quite get the perfect score. The stupid convenience of the Animorphs stumbling into the magic shop cannot be overlooked, and accidental or not, I found the existence of Timmy pretty distracting. But those together only knock it down a point. Maybe I'm praising it because it gives my views vindication. The other great Cassie books were about Cassie overcoming her hang-ups to make the world a better place. This one is about Cassie embracing her hang-ups and destroying everything. And this time, that's the point. That's the intended point. The only time in the series looks at one of its main characters and goes, no, this one is bad at being the hero. I give number 50 The Ultimate a 9 out of 10. Hey there, whoa, calm down. Take a deep breath. Look, I got some bottled water. Don't worry, you're out of danger. Those pesky animal freaks are gone. Hey, I couldn't help but notice you managed to snag that magic alien box everyone's going gaga over. You could do some amazing things with that. We could do some amazing things with that. Hi, I'm Dealing Dan Hawk, and have I got a deal for you, Tom?